Politics south of the border, Donald Trump's top trade representative laid out some top policy concerns for Canada.
The Trump team could come up with more demands and request additional concessions. Now, we already know what Canada has been pushing for. It wants to stay in the agreement, and it wants to see an end to those separate tariffs that are pummeling Canadian industries.
Prime Minister Mark Carney says he will not give in on at least one key demand from Washington.
It was supposed to be a simple renewal, a 16-year extension of the most important trade deal Canada has. But in a single public moment in Washington, it turned into something else entirely, an ultimatum. United States Trade Representative Jamieson Greer stood before Congress and didn't just lay out a negotiating position. He issued a list of 5 non-negotiable demands. This wasn't the usual backroom diplomacy. This was a public political shakedown. Washington was broadcasting its price tag for peace, and every single demand was a direct attack on a core Canadian policy. The message was clear: give us what we want, or the deal is off. So what does Trump want? Demand number 1, dairy. Greer called Canada's supply management system unfair, a wall protecting Canadian farmers. He wants American dairy flooding across the border. Prime Minister Mark Carney's response came less than 24 hours later, blunt and in 2 languages. Supply management is not on the table, period. Full stop. It was a deliberate signal to Quebec, where the system is politically sacred. But it was more than that. It was Canada's first no. A law was passed in June, making this commitment permanent. The door isn't just closed, it's legally welded shut. Demand number 2, digital media. This targets Canada's Online Streaming Act and Online News Act, the laws that force giants like Netflix and Google to fund Canadian content and journalism. Greer called them discriminatory against American tech companies. But Canada's position is about survival. Without these laws, Canadian stories and news are drowned out by a Silicon Valley tsunami. Carney sees this for what it is, a choice between cultural sovereignty and submission. He chose sovereignty. Demand number 3, provincial alcohol bans. Several provinces banned American beer and wine in retaliation for Trump's tariffs. Greer wants those bans lifted. But here's what Washington is pretending to forget. The bans are a direct consequence of Trump's own tariffs. Canada's message is simple and reciprocal. You lift your tariffs, we lift our bans. Asking Canada to unilaterally disarm is not a negotiation. It's a demand for surrender. Demand number 4, government procurement. Greer complained that provinces like Ontario and Quebec dare to buy Canadian products first. He called it discriminatory. This is perhaps the most audacious demand of all, a stunning display of hypocrisy. The United States has the Buy American Act, a massive, complex web of rules ensuring federal and state money stays domestic. Washington is literally demanding Canada stop doing what America does every single day. Demand number 5, energy policy. Here the demand gets technical and vague. A complaint about Alberta's electrical grid favoring local power. Alberta's government rejected it outright. But the real story of energy flows the other way. The U.S. imports nearly 4 million barrels of Canadian oil daily, and New England depends on Canadian electricity to keep the lights on. This demand feels less like a serious grievance and more like an attempt to find leverage where none exists. 5 demands, 5 direct hits on Canadian agriculture, culture, provincial rights, economic policy, and energy. But here's where the story twists. Everyone watching assumed this was a moment of maximum pressure, where Canada would be forced to calculate which sacred cow to sacrifice first. The global playbook says a smaller economy folds when the superpower issues its list. Mark Carney didn't fold. He refused. All of them. Publicly. Definitively. This raises the critical, explosive question that Washington never saw coming. What if Canada's weakness is actually its greatest strength? What if, by demanding everything, Trump just revealed how much he needs this deal? Greer's list isn't a list of Canadian vulnerabilities. It's a receipt proving Canadian policies are working. They're protecting farmers, funding culture, fighting back against tariffs, keeping money at home, and managing a shared energy network. Every demand is an admission that Canada is succeeding in an area that hurts a powerful American interest group. But saying no to the world's largest economy is a dangerous game. To understand why Carney is betting everything on this refusal, and why it might be the smartest or riskiest gamble in modern Canadian history, you need to see what's hiding between the lines of those 5 demands. To understand the sheer audacity of Carney's 5 refusals, you have to see the hidden chessboard. This isn't just about dairy or streaming services. It's about a fundamental miscalculation in Washington and a quiet, year-long strategy in Ottawa that built an entirely new set of rules. First, consider the stunning silence in Greer's demands. He said nothing about automobiles. For a deal that originated as a vehicle to manage the integrated North American auto industry, that silence is deafening. Why? Because it's Canada's secret leverage. The auto supply chain is a tangled, borderless web. Parts and components cross the Canada-US border dozens of times before a car is finished. Major U.S. automakers have testified to Congress that this deal is essential to their survival, accounting for tens of billions in savings. Trump's own tariffs on steel and aluminum disrupted this very system, hurting American plants. If this trade agreement collapses, the integrated supply chain that Detroit depends on starts to unravel. The American auto industry needs this deal more than Canada does. Carney knows this. His refusal on smaller items is a signal that he won't be bullied, precisely because he's holding the ace on the biggest one. But the auto card is just the beginning. While Trump was posting about making Canada the 51st state, Carney was executing a cold, calculated plan to make Canada less dependent on the United States than at any point in 50 years. Step 1. The China card. Carney didn't sign a sweeping free trade deal with Beijing. That would have triggered a clause allowing the U.S. to exit its own pact. Instead, he negotiated a targeted, friendly nation arrangement, dropping tariffs on key items like canola and electric vehicles. Trump initially praised it, then reversed himself, threatening 100% tariffs if Canada became a drop-off port for China. But the damage to American leverage was already done. The real impact wasn't about canola, it was about proof. Proof that Canadian farmers have other markets. Proof that Canada can build trade routes that don't go through Chicago or New York. Every alternative route is a thread pulled from the rope Washington uses to pull Canada along. Step 2. The Davos Declaration. At the World Economic Forum, Carney didn't just give a speech. He issued a manifesto for middle powers. He warned that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, and declared that smaller nations must never accept economic subordination. The room gave him a standing ovation. European leaders lined up to agree. Trump's Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, sneered that it was virtue signaling to globalists. Bessent missed the point entirely. The speech wasn't for Washington, it was for Berlin, Paris, Tokyo, and Seoul. It was about building a coalition of nations equally tired of coercion from a single, unpredictable superpower. Carney wasn't just saying no to the U.S., he was whispering, there's another way to the rest of the world. Step 3. The domestic fortress. Policies like Buy Canadian redirect billions in government spending to domestic companies. Critical minerals strategies position Canada as the indispensable supplier for the U.S.'s own clean energy and AI ambitions, materials Washington desperately needs to counter China. Each move makes Canada's economy more self-reliant and, paradoxically, more strategically vital to the U.S. at the same time. This brings us to the core contradiction that Carney is exploiting. Trump says the trade deal is irrelevant, but his own trade representative told Congress that U.S. exports to Canada and Mexico under the deal are worth $960 billion and have grown 56% since it took effect. You don't meticulously craft a 5-point demand list for something you plan to throw away. The theatrical threats of withdrawal are just that, theater. The data and the panic of major U.S. industry groups tells the real story. The American economy needs this deal. And then, Trump made a crucial, petty mistake. He publicly uninvited Mark Carney from a high-profile Board of Peace initiative, a blatant attempt to humiliate him after the Davos speech. The snub made global headlines, but instead of weakening Carney, it transformed him. Now every demand from Washington looks less like negotiation and more like bullying a leader who was already publicly slighted. Every calm refusal from Carney looks less like obstinance and more like dignified courage. Trump tried to paint Carney as a globalist puppet. He accidentally painted him as the adult in the room, standing up for national interest. So, we have a paradox. 5 public demands, 5 public refusals. An American president who claims he doesn't need a deal presiding over an economy that desperately does. And a Canadian prime minister who has spent a year constructing an exit ramp from American dependency. This sets the stage for the most high-stakes game of chicken in North American trade history. The deal expires for review in July. The options are simple. Extend it for 16 years, kill it entirely, or trigger a decade of annual review cycles, a purgatory of uncertainty. The old assumption was that Canada, sending 75% of its exports south, would cave at the last minute. But that was the old Canada. The new Canada, Carney's Canada, has something it hasn't had in generations, a credible alternative to saying yes. The critical final question remains. Is this a brilliant bluff or a new permanent reality? What happens in July when the clock actually runs out? To see the endgame, you need to look at who is truly afraid of no deal, and the answer might surprise you. The endgame is not set in a negotiating room. It's playing out in corporate boardrooms across the United States, and the pressure is building not on Mark Carney, but on Donald Trump. Remember that list of 5 demands? For American industry leaders, it wasn't a wish list, it was a danger list. Every time Carney refuses a demand on dairy, digital media, or procurement, a powerful U.S. lobby group feels the ground shifting beneath them. The dairy farmers in Wisconsin, the tech giants in Silicon Valley, the manufacturers in the Rust Belt, they all see their access to the Canadian market, worth hundreds of billions, being put at risk over political points. This is Carney's masterstroke. He isn't just defending Canadian policies, he's outsourcing the pressure. He's letting the U.S. trade representative fight political battles, while making the CEO of General Motors, the lobbyists for big tech, and the energy executives in Texas calculate their losses. Nearly 150 major U.S. industry groups have already begged Congress to preserve the trade deal. They are the first to pick up the phone to the White House when headlines scream, "Canada refuses all demands." Trump faces a brutal political equation. He can play the tough guy and threaten to blow up the deal, energizing his base. But if he actually does it, he triggers immediate economic pain in key electoral states, pain inflicted not by an enemy, but by his own administration. The political cost of actual collapsed supply chains, actual plant closures in Michigan, and actual rising consumer prices would be catastrophic. This is the trap Carney has laid. By refusing the 5 demands, he forces Trump to choose between his political persona, the deal-breaking tough negotiator, and his political survival, which depends on a strong economy. So, what happens in July? The most likely outcome is not a dramatic collapse, nor a full Canadian surrender. It's a grudging, face-saving extension, likely for a shorter term, with vague commitments to continue discussions on some issues. The 5 demands will be quietly shelved, not defeated. Trump will claim he won concessions. Carney will stand beside him, having surrendered nothing of substance. The theater will be preserved for the cameras, while the vital economic plumbing remains intact. But something fundamental has changed. This showdown has rewritten the Canada-US relationship. For decades, the core principle was asymmetrical interdependence. Canada was dependent. The US was dominant. Negotiations were about managing Canadian vulnerability. Carney's 5 refusals signal that era is over. The new principle is asymmetrical necessity. The U.S. needs Canadian resources, integration, and stability just as much as Canada needs access to its market. But for the U.S., that need is now strategic and urgent. It needs Canadian critical minerals for its tech war with China. It needs Canadian energy for its grid security. It needs Canadian auto parts for its manufacturing base. This need gives Canada leverage it has never assessed before. The Prime Minister didn't just say no to 5 demands. He demonstrated that Canada can withstand the pressure. The Buy Canadian policies, the China arrangement, the Davos coalition, they all served one purpose: to prove that the threat of cutting Canada off is no longer credible. The bluff has been called. When the deal is eventually extended, it will be a victory not because Canada won, but because it proved it could not lose. It demonstrated that in the face of maximum pressure, it could hold its line, protect its interests, and make the most powerful nation in the world come back to the table. The lesson for the future is clear. In an age of coercion and volatility, a country's strength isn't measured by the deals it signs, but by the deals it can afford to walk away from. Mark Carney spent a year building that ability to walk away. When the 5 demands landed, he was ready. This was never just about dairy, streaming, or procurement. It was a test of sovereignty in the 21st century, a test of whether a nation could be bullied into surrendering the pillars of its economy, culture, and identity. By refusing all 5, Canada answered. And in doing so, it didn't just protect a trade deal. It announced that the era of North American relations where one side makes all the demands and the other makes all the concessions is finally decisively over. For clear, fact-driven analysis of how Canada navigates power politics and defends its sovereignty, subscribe to Canada Today. Like this video, share it, and let us know in the comments. What should Canada's next move be?